You are tapped in with Caden. Last night kicked off the biggest fight of the year so far. David Benavidez versus David Morrell. David Benavidez was able to win a unanimous decision, and experience played a key role in the fight. For those of you who disagree, the fighters themselves admitted that. So you can fall back. Let's take a look at what David Morrell had to say about this. This video appears courtesy of Fight Hub TV. Subscribe to Fight Hub TV.
David, I wondered when we were leading up to the fight, there was a lot of discussion about your relative lack of professional experience compared to David. I know you had the great amateur background. He had so many more pro fights. It seemed like that was a factor because he was able to slow it down, speed it up, and do sort of what he wanted at a lot of the times. I wonder if you felt like that the experience level was maybe a little bit much for you. I'd actually like to hear Ronnie's perspective on that also.
Bueno, primero vos, David, la pregunta es si el factor de la experiencia fue algo que inclinó la balanza a favor de Benavidez, y también él quería la perspectiva de tu entrenador Ronnie Shields, pero primero vos, contanos qué sentís sobre esa perspectiva.
Sí, creo que fue uno de los factores que inclinó la balanza a su favor. No un 100% como muchos esperaban, ¿no? Pero sí fue como que un factor principal para él obtener la victoria.
It was definitely one of the main factors in this fight where it didn't tilt the balance 100%, but it definitely was something that played a role in the outcome of the fight.
Yeah, I would say so also, that did play a big role, in the fight. But, I'm so proud of my guy because although that was his 12th fight, boxing, you learn from fights, you learn from experience. And this is something that, we will take away from. And next time, we just keep moving on.
David.
All right. Now, David Benavidez was asked the same question, and he acknowledged that experience played a key role in his victory over David Morrell, and he gave some reasons as to why. So let's take a listen to what David Benavidez had to say. And again, this video appears courtesy of Fight Hub TV. Subscribe to Fight Hub TV.
The fact that you had so much more experience, a lot of people thought that would really be a big key, as excellent of a fighter as he is. I looked at the fight, I thought that's a big difference. I wanted to get your take on whether you felt like you could just basically kind of, I'd not say do whatever you wanted to do, but really control that fight from start to finish.
Yeah, it was they did play a big role, but he should have been calling me out. I've been professional 11 years. Now my past 5 fights have been big fights. So now I kind of know, that you can't, that you got to take it easy the first couple rounds. And I know how to work a 12-round fight. I know how to work a great fighter. And I'm just looking forward to keep being the best version of myself every single fight.
You also said before this fight that, which I found an unusual comment, you wanted to redeem yourself from the Vodzik.
Yes, we could talking about redeeming himself from his last performance, and he was injured. But you heard it there. David Benavidez said he knew, based on his prior experience, how to prepare for the fight, what to expect during the fight. And David Morrell and even his trainer, Rodney Shields, said, yeah, experience played a role. And for me, that was one of the biggest takeaways. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll see I posted. I scored the fight 115-111 for David Benavidez, and I stated 2 of the judges who were scoring the fight scored it the same way as well. And I stated that David Benavidez got David Morrell at the right time, similar to when Floyd Mayweather beat Canelo. David Morrell is a very good fighter. This is a very good win for David Benavidez on his resume, and he deserves a lot of credit for it. But the fight may have been different if they would have fought a year from now, maybe even two fights from now, a year from now, if Morrell had more experience. If Morrell wasn't taking on David Benavidez in his 12th professional fight, there's a strong chance that this fight may have turned out differently. I'm going to give you some of the key reasons why David Benavidez's experience is what propelled him to beat David Morrell. And first, we're going to start with the fact that David Benavidez knew how to pace himself. You heard him say it. he knows in a big fight you kind of got to ease your way into it. And David Morrell started off the fight with a very high punch output. You heard, if you look at the punch stats and you listen to the commentary, they were stating how he was outworking David Benavidez and his activity was really high during the first 3 rounds. And one of the things that worried me after the first 3 rounds, and I had it 2-2 after the first 4 rounds, was that David Morrell was throwing so much more than David Benavidez, but the rounds were still razor close. And the fact that his punch output could only dip, it could only dip after the first 4 rounds, and the fact that Benavidez was able to throw less punches and still be able to nick rounds wasn't a good sign for David Morrell early. And part of that was the pacing that David Benavidez was talking about. And you saw that after round 6, David Benavidez was able to still apply relentless pressure. All right. Now, the other thing, David Benavidez knew flashy work would score even if the punches were being blocked. Now, everyone talks about David Morrell and they talk about his amateur pedigree. But the thing is, amateur scoring and professional scoring is different. In the amateurs, they're very particular on landing with the scoring part of the glove and landing a clean punch that isn't parried, picked off, or blocked by a glove, even partially blocked by a glove. In the professionals, like the pro rank, it doesn't really matter. What matters is, does it look like you're hurting your opponent? Even if your opponent picks off a punch and you still rock them and still rattles them, it gives the impression to the judge that that punch was effective and it hurt. And so there were times where David Morrell stood with his high guard and he was picking off shots or partially blocking shots, even fully blocking shots. But David Benavidez was throwing with tremendous force and his punch output was high. And in those exchanges, David Benavidez was showing he was the boss and he was looking flashy. Now, the difference is, if this was the amateurs, when Morrell was partially picking off those punches and they weren't landing flush, the judges don't score that. They don't score for a land punch. But when you talk about ring generalship, effective aggression, when you look at what David Benavidez was doing, although David Morrell was sitting there picking off punches with his gloves, and he was picking off a lot of punches with his gloves, but some were partially landing, and that matters in the pro game because David Benavidez is giving the impression that he's the boss, he's the ring general, he's the one who's being aggressive. It's effective because although he didn't land clean in that exchange, he didn't land clean at points in the round. And David Benavidez knew this. So this is one of the biggest things that those who are really great amateurs have to learn about the pro game. Even Vasily Lomachenko had to learn this after his fight with Orlando Salido, that the pros, it doesn't matter if they don't look for scoring with a certain part of the glove and all that. No, it's about, are you the boss in the ring? Controlling the round. Is your aggression effective? So after watching that, it was apparent that David Benavidez knew how to use his flashiness. He knew how to score, even in moments where David Morrell showed pretty good defense. Benavidez made sure he upped his punch output when it mattered most. So this is what I'm talking about. After the first 3 rounds, David Morrell's punch output was significantly higher than David Benavidez. But as the fight continued, Benavidez started to close the gap with the punch output. And what I noticed was Morrell threw a lot of punches, but David Benavidez was selective when he upped his output. And when David Benavidez upped his punch output, it was when it mattered most. It was during exchanges. It was when he had David Morrell cornered. It was when he could actually land his punches in a manner in which he would land something powerful, even if it was blocked or partially blocked. So his selection, it was almost Canelo-esque. Canelo's known for doing that. Like Canelo's like, even when you block Canelo's shots, it's like that looked like it hurt. Even Dimitri Bivol admitted that, like, yeah, my shoulder, everything, like, yeah, my shoulders are hurt. But because although Dimitri Bivol was picking off Canelo's punches, when you watch it, you know it has to hurt. Like, you're like, that has to hurt still. And that's some of what David Benavidez did. He upped his output when it mattered most. So whenever there was an exchange and they were going at it, David Benavidez made sure that he was the more active fighter when it mattered most. So although punch stats may say David Morrell threw more punches, in the exchanges that mattered the most, David Benavidez was the more active fighter. And David Benavidez, again, blitzed David Morrell several times where David Morrell resorted to the high guard and David Benavidez teed off on him. And although David Morrell picked off most of the punches, it still did damage, somewhat Canelo style. All right. Next, David Morrell did good work, but Benavidez made sure the judges knew his work was better. David Morrell did great work. In practically every round, David Morrell landed good punches on David Benavidez. And although David Morrell didn't win, he did the best that I've ever seen anyone do against David Benavidez. Excuse me. And it was only his 12th professional fight. And you really got to take your hats off to a guy like David Morrell who wanted the Mexican monster in his 12th professional fight. And he did good work against the Mexican monster. But the problem is David Benavidez made sure that everyone knew his work was better. And again, David Benavidez made sure he landed the flashier punches. He made sure that if he got hit with a hard one, he answered back. That's experience. And Morrell needed to understand that when he landed good on Benavidez and Benavidez answered back, and then Benavidez was up in his punch output, that he needed to land something back. He needed to return. He needed to land another big punch. And he seemed satisfied with the fact that he landed the big punch first. But sometimes who lands the big punch, the big counter, is what stays in the judge's mind. And again, to me, that was the amateur scoring system where David Morrell was like, okay, I landed a big one. Benavidez landed a big one. We're even. No, in the pro game, it's not even. You land a big left hook. I land a devastating left hook. My left hook's better because if I got some type of reaction from you, if I knocked you off balance, if the impression is that my left hook hurt more than yours did, I win. Although we both just landed one punch. And I can tell at times during their exchanges, Morrell was satisfied with the big punches he landed. So when Benavidez would counter, he wouldn't try to get it back. He would just move out the way. And I think that's one of the other things that David Benavidez did well. He made sure that, yes, David Morrell did good work, but my work was better, and he made sure that the judges knew that. All right. Benavidez went forward while Morrell was on his back foot most of the night. We talk about this all the time in boxing. Can you take a champion's title if you're on the back foot? If you're not throwing punches? Well, I would say this. Although David Morrell was on the back foot, he was landing powerful punches. He was landing the best punches we've ever seen anyone land against David Benavidez. So I don't think he was penalized much for that. However, when David Benavidez starts his onslaught and he's landing powerful punches and you're on the back foot, it does look like you're not willing to engage, even if that was your plan from the beginning. And that's kind of what I believe hurt Dimitri Bivol in his fight with Artur Beterbiev. Because when a fight heats up, the last thing fans want to see, or even the judges, is someone who's backing away from the firefight. If you back away from the firefight, it gives the impression that you want no parts of the guy who is willing to engage in the firefight. Whether or not it's true, that's the impression. And if you're backing up, it's strategic. Strategically, David Morrell doesn't want to exchange with David Benavidez, so he needs to back up. But why doesn't he want to exchange with David Benavidez? Because it would be to his detriment. So, of course, if he backs away from the exchange, perception is David Benavidez won that moment in the fight because David Morrell is retreating. And that happened several times, which is why you got to give some of those close rounds to David Benavidez because he was doing what he wanted to do. And David Morrell, if he was outboxing on the back foot, kind of how Stephen Fulton did to Figueroa in the fight before. If he was landing the better shots from the back foot and he was manipulating the fight, controlling the fight, and doing what he wanted to do from the back foot, well, then fine. But when it's a razor close round and one person is going forward and you're retreating, it gives the impression that you're retreating because you don't want to get into a firefight with the fighter that's going forward. And that was certainly the perception with David Benavidez last night. Morrell took an unnecessary shot at Benavidez after the bell and lost a point in the 11th round. To me, this was huge. Huge. This was one of the biggest mistakes that David Morrell made that showed his inexperience. One, I think there's a legitimate argument that can be made that in the heat of battle, he didn't hear the bell. Because a lot of people don't understand this, but like when you're under fire like that in the last 10 seconds of a round, it's very hard to hear the bell. Because you got to focus on not getting hit by David Benavidez, who had him cornered and was trying to take his head off, right? And listening for the bell, that's very difficult. That's part of the reason why if you watch most professional fights, when they hit the bell for 10 seconds, you'll see fighters kind of cool off. Some people feel like, well, why aren't they getting it in the last 10 seconds? Because it's hard to hear that bell when you're in an exchange. And if you land one after the exchange, you can lose a point. That's why most fighters don't always go for exchanges or attack once the 10-second bell rings. It's not that they don't want to fight or whatever. It's not that it's a mutual agreement that, oh, we're not going to attack each other. You can attack, but there is that risk that the adrenaline, the heat of the moment, you may not hear the bell. Even if that was the case with David Morrell, right? He should have held that punch. He should have held that punch because you know that the round is close to ending, at least in your mind. He had escaped David Benavidez's onslaught, and then he threw that hook. It was unnecessary in the sense that if he would have held it, the round would have ended, and he wouldn't have lost a point. But he throws the punch to land the counter. He hits Benavidez, and he loses a point. To me, the point deduction wasn't justified. For the reasons I stated, I think it's reasonable. A reasonable person could assume that David Morrell was in the heat of battle, and he just threw a punch. And the referee kind of didn't jump in the way Russ would normally jump in to say round because Benavidez was throwing. So you would, to me, give him a warning, ask Benavidez if he's okay, if he needs some time, would have been a better way to handle it instead of just taking a point for David Morrell. I wasn't a big fan of that. But it was an experience that made him risk throwing that punch after he had already had a 10-8 round in the bag. That 10-8 round turns to a 9-8 round, and that hurts David Morrell. And it kills the momentum because there was going to be some serious momentum going into that 12th round. The fight was close, despite what some people would say. You have eyes, the fight was close at that point, and he just scored a knockdown on David Benavidez, the Mexican monster. If that round was scored 10-8, it would have been some serious drama going into that 12th round. But unfortunately, like I said, he lost the point immediately after scoring a knockdown, and it killed the momentum quickly. And this is the last point I'm going to make about how David Benavidez's experience won the night. Benavidez knew he had to win the 12th round to remove all doubts in public cry for a rematch. He knew he had to. And he went out and he took the 12th round. Because when I saw the referee take a point from David Morrell in the 11th round, I'm thinking, oh, the PBC protection program. They see this thing heating up and they don't want David Benavidez, their guy right now, to lose. So they took that point from David Morrell. But in the end, it ended up being insignificant because David Benavidez came out in the 12th round and he tried to close the show, which you got to give David Benavidez props for. Now, here's the reason why it was very important. I told you I scored the fight 115-111. Two of the judges in the fight scored at 115-111 as well, which means if David Morrell doesn't lose a point at the end of the 11th round, he gets a 10-8 round. If he carries that momentum to the 12th round and he wins the 12th round, then I score the fight 114-113 for David Benavidez. So does two of the other judges. And that other judge who had it 118-108 is crazy, but that judge ends up having it about 116-110. And we're talking about a unanimous decision for David Benavidez, but we're talking about one in which two judges saw him squeak by a point. And now the world is saying, oh, we want to see it again. He barely beat the guy who had 12 fights in a rematch. David Morrell will cook him. That's the perception. But unfortunately, David Morrell derailed his momentum by throwing that punch and losing a point. Because if he doesn't lose that point, it's possible momentum carries him into that 12th round. The energy burst he gets. You can hurt him. Go in there. Get it done. And he goes out there and wins the 12th round. And two of the judges scored 114-113 Benavidez. Everyone's like, damn, this dude who only had 12 fights was 1 point away from beating David Benavidez. But what ends up happening when he gets a point deduction and he loses the 12th round is the fight ends up being 115-111, a 4-point victory. And it seems like, yeah, it wasn't even close. But really, that's not true. The fight was much closer than the 115-111 score. But Benavidez was smart and he knew that he needed to win that 12th round to remove all doubt. So in closing, I thought it was a very good fight, highly skilled fight. I think both fighters knew what they were up against and they trained extremely hard. That's the reason David Morrell was able to survive 12. And that's the reason why Benavidez was able to be active and to do the things he did. For me personally, this fight did wonders for David Benavidez because this is the first time he fought someone who was younger. I won't say younger, but young. Someone who was young, hungry, bigger than him, who had tremendous skills, who was very hungry, and no one can say he didn't come in confident that he can win. And it's also someone he beat who's a very dangerous fighter that Canelo didn't beat. And it's good to see him forging his own path. So this was a very big victory for David Benavidez. David Morrell may go on to accomplish great things, just like Canelo Alvarez went on to accomplish great things after the Floyd defeat. And David Benavidez will be able to say, I gave that kid a boxing lesson. But David Morrell, if you're going to give Floyd Schofield credit for being a prospect and stepping up to fight Shakur Stevenson, you have no choice but to give David Morrell credit for stepping up in his 12th professional fight to fight David Benavidez. Because don't get it twisted, Shakur Stevenson will embarrass you. He'll make you look silly for 12 rounds. But by the 7th to 9th round, some in the crowd may be asleep, so they won't even remember it. David Benavidez, on the other hand, can put your lights out and give you a hell of a beating, even if he doesn't. So David Morrell deserves a lot of credit, a lot of respect. And I salute both gentlemen for fighting each other when they did. This is what happens when the best fight the best. You get great, thrilling fights. This took me back to, now I feel like Larry Merchant almost, but this took me back to probably about 2001 to, let's say like 2001 to 2004, where we would see some of these fights. The two up and comers facing each other because they knew that they were too dangerous to get too risky to get a fight with the big dogs, and they were going to have to go through each other to get what they wanted. The beauty in this fight is, to me, no one's stock really took a hit because Benavidez won, and he was the favorite. He's the guy who really needed to win more so than David Morrell, and David Morrell performed well enough that people are going to look at him and be like, he belongs. And when you're young like David Morrell and you haven't been in with the top tier competition, you still have to prove to yourself you belong. Last night, David Morrell proved to himself, I belong here. He's going to be even more dangerous because he's thinking, if I stop cutting these little corners that I normally cut and really dedicate myself, I think I could beat David Benavidez. Whether or not that's true remains to be seen. But the point I'm making is, I think he found out he belonged last night. And I think David Benavidez proved last night that he's serious business. How serious is he? We'll find out in some of the segments coming up. Thank you for rocking with me. Like, share, subscribe. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Also, if you can't watch the videos, you can listen to the podcast on all major streaming services. It's Caden. I'm out. Peace.